Called Careless Whisper. So what are we talking about for the next hour? Well, this. At the end of last year, Jersey's resident population was estimated to be in the region of 100,800. It had grown by 1,800 people in the previous 2 years. Now, it's thought that about 600 people have come into the island for each of the last 2 years, and some are asking why Jersey's government still hasn't got a coherent policy on populations. Questions were asked in the States this week about when that might happen. Here's our political reporter, Chris Rayner.
It's an issue that's never far from the minds and lips of our politicians and other commentators too. Everyone has a view. In the time between the 2001 census and the one in 2011, it grew from 87,000 to close to 98,000 people. And now it's tipped over that magic number of 100,000. In the last 2 years, 1,200 people have come into the island from elsewhere, with the population naturally growing by 600 over the last 2 years. But what's been the government's response so far? Currently, there's only an interim population policy allowing an extra 325 economically active people in. According to Deputy Chief Minister Senator Andrew Green, the government is working on it.
Population policy is a critical element of the government's priorities. And this week, or later this week, sir, the Chief Minister will be inviting members to a briefing to provide more detail on what we have done and how we intend to progress.
And by this week, he means invitations will be sent out this week, with a meeting sometime later this year. So even though there is a policy of sorts and new controls on who can live and work here, more people are still coming. HAWAG, the Housing and Work Advisory Group, aims to limit those coming into the island for work, reviewing applications to favour those that will contribute to the economy. Certainly, there are lots of jobs here, and that's a good thing, according to Deputy Andrew Lewis.
Any job increases in the current world economic cycle for most economies should be celebrated, not condemned. Surely what we should be more concerned about, which is a common problem with small island nations, is the risk of depopulation.
And it's islands like Guernsey that are seeing their numbers fall, which could be a problem when paying for a health service to support a resident population that's growing and retiring in greater numbers than ever before. The trick is to get the balance right. But many don't think the government is capable of doing that in an island that's already feeling overcrowded. Deputy Sam Mézec was asking this question.
Surely population is the most important of our long-term policies we need to be looking at, given that it will have an impact on virtually every single penny that the government spends or raises. So could I ask the Deputy Chief Minister then, in these discussions, will States members have an opportunity to propose ways that we can reverse what has been, up until now, the consistent track record of this government, where it has missed every single one of its population targets over the past few years?
Up until now, the government has been concentrating on forming its strategic aims and working out how to pay for them. It says it now has time to sit down and form its population policy. Some of the work has already been done following the 2011 census, when they developed models to show what would happen over the course of 70 years. If all migration stopped, Jersey's population would fall, as would the number of working-age islanders, having to support more of those who've retired or are in education. So it would seem the choice facing politicians is how many you let in and how you target those best to support the economy and the community. Certainly the big infrastructure projects, the new hospital and the updated sewage treatment works, will be designed with a larger population in mind.
Okie doke, time to welcome our guest to the studio. Deputy Sam Mézec is here from Reform Jersey. Nice to see you again, Deputy.
You as well.
Right. Just before we start talking, we did ask the State's Communication Department if Senator Andrew Green or Senator Paul Routier would talk to us about the issue of population, but they declined. They did give us a statement. You're smiling already.
I'm intrigued to know what the reasoning is.
Here's the statement. The Assistant Chief Minister was very clear on this back in July, as was the Deputy Chief Minister earlier this week when he answered your question in the States. In our first year, he goes on, we focused on delivering a strategic plan and a medium-term financial plan. Now we continue to work on to reshape our public services, deliver sustainable public finances and set a long-term policy direction. Population policy is a critical element of government priorities. This week, the Chief Minister will be inviting statesmen, members to a briefing to provide more detail on what has been done and how the Council of Ministers intends to progress. It is important that this briefing with States members takes place before there is any future public comment from the government. Have you got your invite yet?
No, not that I'm aware of. I'll have to check my emails. I'll be eagerly awaiting that. I have to be honest, I find it astounding that when the BBC offers to do an hour-long discussion on what is the most important subject facing our island's future, the issue of population, that out of 11 ministers and 10 assistant ministers, they couldn't send anyone here to take questions from the public, to answer questions from me trying to hold them to account in a political way. They've not been prepared to do that. I find that astounding. This is such an important subject and they should be willing to speak to the public about it.
You asked the question in the States the other day. Were you satisfied with the answer you got?
I didn't get an answer. That's a growing trend in States question time. It's increasingly becoming a waste of time because ministers just don't answer the question. In fact, in this question session, I had to ask the same question of Andrew Green twice because he failed to even attempt to answer it the first time. The fact is that we're looking towards a future where the government wants to put together a comprehensive population policy. OK, so that's the right thing to do. We need a comprehensive population policy. I support that in principle. But up until now, they have missed every single target they've set. So it actually doesn't matter what your population policy is if it only exists on paper. It's got to exist on the ground as well. So what I'm concerned about is that we'll go through this consultation and it'll end up being a complete waste of time because it won't reflect the reality that we create afterwards.
OK, tell me why you think this is the most important issue that the States needs to deal with at the moment.
It basically affects everything. How many people there are living in Jersey and how many people there are of working age living in Jersey is absolutely fundamental to everything the government and private sector need to bear in mind when trying to create a cohesive society. We need to know what our population is going to be in future decades so that we know today what size hospital we need to build. We need to know what population projections are going to be for the western half of the island so we know how big a new Lekeneve school we need to build is. We need to know how we need to restructure our tax system today to cope with a ageing population in years into the future. If we get any of this wrong, or we base our spending and tax targets based on figures that turn out to be incorrect, then we're going to basically shift our problems to future generations. And I think the one thing every generation in politics has to do is it can't leave a mess for future generations to clear up. It's not the moral thing to do, and it's not the politically prudent thing to do either.
Would you not agree, though, that you can't do anything without knowing what cash is available? And I'm alluding to the fact that finally the medium-term financial plan got through the States last week, albeit with a couple of fairly minor alterations there. So until you know what cash is available, you can't really begin to decide what you're going to do with it and how you're going to control population, how you're going to do all the things that you've just been talking about.
Yeah, indeed. And I thought it was thoroughly depressing that this medium-term financial plan was passed. Myself and my party were calling for it to be scrapped and for a new one to be come up with because the figures we were given in this MTFP were basically just guideline umbrella figures. We had no detail whatsoever post-spending figures for 2017. This is £3.1 billion worth of spending. We didn't have any detail whatsoever. We don't know what's going where. And most importantly, we don't know if they'll actually hit the small number of figures they've actually given us because, as I said before, their track record at hitting these things is very poor and they've not done any impact assessment whatsoever on how these figures will be affected if we have a sudden surge in unemployment or if the economy starts shrinking again, which is looking increasingly likely, unfortunately. The fact is, coming up with future forecasts is very, very difficult, but I just don't think the government is making the effort. It's not hiring the expert economic advisors that will say, if this happens to your population, this is what will happen to your tax income. If this happens to your population, this is what you'll need to do to your government spending. They're not doing any of these tasks, and I think that's just because they think too short-term about this. They think in one election cycles, and that's just one of the other negative aspects of having a so-called system of independent politicians. OK. Well, the very name of your party, Reform Jersey, suggests that you do want to change things, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the hour that we've got together. Would a more accurate name for the party be Reform Jersey States? No, I think Reform Jersey we were initially founded to campaign for reforms to the composition of the States Assembly, but the reason we need reforms to the composition of the States Assembly is because we have successive governments which are completely out of touch with the public, and they come up with solutions to the problems we face that are nowhere near in line with what the public actually wants. So if we were going to change our party name, a more accurate one would probably be something like the Jersey Social Democratic Party, because we foresee a future for Jersey which is based on a fair tax system, decent public services, and a government which listens to the people. But there's no need to change the name at the moment. I think most people understand what Reform Jersey stands for at the moment.
OK, Deputy Mézec, you're new newish into the States, a year or so into it. Did you find the whole process down there frustrating?
Yes, but it wasn't anything I didn't expect. Because when I stood for election to the States, I was standing... the first time I wasn't a party candidate because the party didn't exist, but I was standing with the help of people like Deputy Jeff Southern and Deputy Montfort Tadyer, who've been around the block plenty of times before. They know how the system works. They know what you've got to do to affect change. And they told me that, basically, before I went in. So when I did get elected, it was exactly as they told me. So I was better prepared for it. And it meant on day one, I was able to do my job much better than somebody who stands as an independent candidate with no help around them.
Tell me how the system works.
Well, basically, they all get together in a darkened room and decide what they can do to look out for the interests of the rich and powerful the most. And that's the most simple way I can describe it.
So what are you talking about? You're suggesting the Council of Ministers just meet in this darkened room?
Well, the room may not be dark. I think that may be an exaggeration.
All right, you're colouring up a little bit.
Yeah,
there.
sure.
But is it down to the Council of Ministers? Is that what you're saying, that all of the power rests there?
It does. We've got a system of collective responsibility in the Jersey political system, which means if you stand for election on an independent manifesto and then you get appointed a minister, you basically have to throw your election manifesto out the window and do whatever the Chief Minister tells you to. So aside from the fact that's incredibly undemocratic and it's not what people have voted for, it ends up in a system where power is concentrated in a very few small hands. That's mostly the Chief Minister, Treasury Minister and Assistant Chief Minister. They basically call the shots, and because they've got a parliamentary majority in the States, opposition is very frustrating, because largely what we have to be doing is giving a voice to people who are disaffected and who have a different vision for what government should be doing. But more so, we need to be looking towards the next election so we can throw some of these people out and look towards reforming the system and making it fairer.
Yeah, so it's only, 3-4 years away now, isn't it? And I guess that from what you're saying, that you're already starting to make those preparations.
I think we have to. The medium-term financial plan that's just been passed was the most damaging proposition that the States of Jersey, in my view, has ever passed, because it's plotted £3.1 billion worth of spending without any assurances in the safety of those forecast figures, and they've put forward £45 million worth of tax rises on middle and low earners, £10 million worth of benefits cuts to the disabled, to pensioners, to single parents, and they've done no assessment whatsoever on what impact that's going to have on the economy. So we really, really need change. The public, I believe, are not happy with what the government's doing, but the only way you can defeat a government is at the ballot box. So ultimately, that's what we've got to be looking towards.
OK, so as I say, you've got another 3 or 4 years to run on that. Let's get back to the subject of population control. Let's talk directly about numbers at the moment. What's your view, that we need to restrict numbers, or do we need to invite the chosen few, if I can put it that way, to come and take up residence and provide their services and their experience to the island?
Well, if we were going to look at it short term, I would say what we should focus on doing at the moment is improving the government systems and infrastructure so that whatever targets we set, we actually hit. Because at the moment, the rule is that we shouldn't be allowing more than 325 people into the island a year. And at the moment, it's 600. So we're almost double the targets we've setting.
What do you think the number should be then?
There is a science to it. It depends what we're doing. If we're going to make our tax system fairer, then I believe you probably could have a bit of leeway letting in around 300 people a year to cope with the fact we've got an ageing population. But if we're not going to do that, and if we're not going to have a focus on getting unemployed local people back into work, giving them the skills they need to be able to contribute to our economy, then I think you're just putting a plaster on an open wound, and you're just allowing, you're basically paving the way for the problem to be put off to tomorrow. So it's not
quite possible to put an actual number on it, but they should be low because we do have lots of unemployed people in the island who should be aiming to get back into work. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to do at the moment is to make sure the government can actually hit its own targets, because it's failing at the moment.
OK, let's talk about numbers a little bit more. So we could take 300 or so per year, according to your calculations.
Possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah,
OK. Would that be a maximum?
I don't know. It is impossible to say if we don't know what state the economy's in, because it will change. If we suddenly have a burst of economic growth and we need people in to fill vacancies, then it may need to go up. So it's difficult to say that. I think we should be trying to keep it as low as possible at the moment, as low as possible.
Who's going to decide who those people are?
It depends on basically whether we can change the current system. So the people who are doing it at the moment, we've got JCAT licences, for example. If we can make that system more fit for purpose, and there's no reason why they couldn't continue to do it, and obviously the people who we're allowing to come into the island, we want to be people who are best suited to enter the sort of up-and-coming jobs. So the digital industry at the moment, for example, is something that's growing, so we'd want people with skills in that. Healthcare, we know at the moment we are really, really struggling with recruiting nurses. Now, there are people all over the world who've got brilliant nursing qualifications, fantastic doctors all around the world. We should be welcoming these sorts of people with open arms, I think.
Yeah. And what would we provide for them? They're going to come here and bring their expertise, their experience to the island. What could we say to them in terms of what they would earn and where they would live, for example?
Well, the basic thing to offer these people is the fact that this is one of the best places in the world to live. And for everything negative we might say about Jersey, and particularly the government, Jersey is a pretty wonderful place. We've got some of the most beautiful scenery on the planet, great beaches, sunniest place in the British Isles, just an hour on the plane away from London if you need to get anywhere else in the world. So we do have a great standard of living that is the envy of many places around the world, and that alone should be encouraging people to want to be here. But I think we're in danger at the moment of rolling back our public services to the point where lots of people who may wish to live and work in Jersey, and not just people coming into the islands, but people who are already here, who know that, well, if you get to a certain age and you want your kids to go to university, our funding for higher education is utterly rubbish. It's completely not fit for purpose and doesn't help those people. So if you're looking to come to the island, you'd want to make sure that actually the social and governmental infrastructure is in place to help you provide for those things. You've got to pay £40 if you want to go see a doctor. You don't have that in the UK. So that's one thing that people would consider when coming here, how much it costs to go see a doctor, how much support they'll have for their kids going to high university. So there are these things we need to be looking to sort out as well, so that we've got a reputation as a place with fantastic social infrastructure that allows people to live happy lives.
Deputy Sam Mézec is with me from Reform Jersey. We're talking about population. We're talking about population control. You must have a view on this, and I'd like to hear from you. We've only got half an hour left, by the way, on 720-255. Phone now with your questions. I'd like to come on the air and perhaps talk to Deputy Sam Mézec directly. If you are, however, a little bit shy, then I'll put it on your behalf. I want you to know what you're thinking, your questions, your views, your ideas, perhaps. Get on the phone, 720-255. You can email Radio Jersey at bbc.co.uk, and of course text us as well, 07786 202 888, and you can also follow us and leave your comments on social media as well.
Tony Gillam
on BBC Radio Jersey.
Deputy Sam Mézec is with me from Reform Jersey. We're talking about population control. We've got people wanting to come on and talk to you, Deputy, in a moment. Just before we broke to go over to the news there, we were talking, or you were talking, giving your views on funding university places for our youngsters. You were talking about the fact that it costs at the moment £40 to go and see the doctor, and you want to change that. Where would the money come from then if you were to subsidise, say, those two things?
At the moment, we have a tax system which the income tax system side is based on a flat rate of tax which was invented about 60 years ago, before we had the internet, before we had public services at the level we've got today, before we had an ageing population. The fact is we need to completely rebalance our tax system at the moment. At the moment, low and middle earners are squeezed pretty badly. We've seen the news of the budget, which is going to be debated soon, which is going to squeeze middle earners even more. I think it's wrong to look to the future without considering how we can ask our highest earners to contribute a bit more. If we raised income tax on some of those people, we would raise a significant amount of money, we'd create a more fair society, and we'd be able to fund our public services much better than we can at the moment.
All right, you put that very succinctly. What about corporation tax?
Corporation tax is a difficult one. I think the black hole we've got today is a result of the sloppy introduction of 010 about a decade ago now, which has seen lots of businesses operating in the island not paying any tax at all. We need to get to grips with that, but we have to do so in such a way where we maintain the tax neutrality which many financial services businesses need to continue to be viable, basically. I think it's possible to do it, but ministers have been saying for every single election I can remember, bear in mind that's only 3 because I'm quite young, but every election I can remember, ministers have been saying they're going to sort this out and they haven't. So we need to get to grips with it, yeah.
Are you confident then that if your suggestions were taken on board and indeed they came to fruition, getting the more wealthy part of the population to contribute a bit more to the system through tax and perhaps overhauling the way companies are taxed over here, would that result, do you think, in balancing the book and providing the kind of benefits that you want to?
Yeah, I think so. We'd have to constantly... I believe tax shouldn't be a static thing. Society changes, our values change, and what we want people to contribute changes. So I think we should be looking every few years, really, about how the tax system can further be moulded to suit what we need, what people are prepared to pay, and what services need to be funded. So it shouldn't be something set in stone. I think having an arbitrary 20% tax figure, frankly, it's not sane because it just doesn't suit the real world.
Deputy Sam Mézec, thank you for that. We've got some callers coming in, if you'd like to put the headphones on there, and we will get to our callers now. I think we've got Peter in St. Juan first up. Hello, Peter.
Afternoon.
Hello. What's your question, please?
Well, the question is, what's Reform Jersey's immigration policy on refugees coming to Jersey? Because I heard Anne Southern say on a Sunday programme about a month ago that she was willing to accept 500.
OK, well, it seems quite a high figure to me. Deputy Mézec.
I presume that's her personal view. We've all got different views about how many we would emotionally be prepared to accept.
How many?
The Chief Minister's policy is about 5 or 6 families. If he can bring forward a proposition to the states that does it in an equitable way, then we'll definitely support that. I think that would probably be a good gesture. And if we can do it in a way which doesn't put out people who are already in the island and struggling to get by, then I think that would be a good thing to do. So position at the moment is if the Chief Minister proposes something equitable, then we'll support it.
Peter?
Well, you didn't answer my question. I said, what is the policy of Reform Jersey?
I think you'll find I did, actually. I said we would support the Chief Minister if he comes up with something equitable.
So you think 5 or 6 families is about right, do you? 30 people, 40 people?
Well, no, it depends on what the... firstly, which people they are. If they're people potentially with decent health qualifications, because remember that Syria is actually a society...
Hold on a minute. You're going to pick and choose which ones you're going to accept?
Well, that may be part of the deal. It may be. We don't know at the moment. The Chief Minister's not come forward with his actual proposition. So it does entirely depend on what he suggests. But if he suggests something which, as I said, is equitable, which doesn't put people out who are already in the island, so housing waiting lists, for example, is something that is a big issue today. If they come up with something that's equitable, we'll support it because we like the idea of Jersey playing its part in helping to deal with an international crisis.
Why don't Reform Jersey come up with an idea of where these refugees could be housed?
Because it's entirely dependent on what agreement the government comes up with the United Kingdom government, and Jersey's opposition doesn't have a legal right to negotiate with the UK government, so it has to be led by the Chief Minister.
Peter, did that answer your question?
No, it didn't. It didn't. I still want to know what their policy is, because Anne Southern is a member of Reform Jersey, is she not?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Peter. I've actually answered your question twice. Anne Southern says that she would be prepared to accept 500 people. That's her personal view. She's entitled to that view. The party policy, which I've explained to you twice now, is that if the Chief Minister...
Well, that's not very well organised of a party, is it?
Well, and
you should have your own policy. Why are you supporting the Chief Minister?
This is the
Answer my question.
I'm sorry, this is the most bizarre line of questioning I've ever had put to me on the BBC.
Really?
Our
Well,
party position, if Anne Southern...
You're lucky you're on the BBC.
Yes, very lucky, thank you. If Anne Southern were an elected Reform Jersey representative, which she is not, but if she were, she would be voting with us in supporting the Chief Minister. That's actually not a very complicated position to understand, Peter.
But with respect, you haven't said what the policy is. All you've said is that you will support the Chief Minister.
That is a policy. We support what the Chief Minister's trying to do.
Whatever he says.
No, I've not said whatever he said. If he came up tomorrow and said we want to accept 60 families, then we would. I suspect we probably wouldn't support that. We'd have to sit down and discuss it. But the position at the moment is if he brings forward something based on 5 or 6 families that's equitable, we'll support it. I think that's a very clear policy, actually.
Well, it sounds to me like you've got a pretty hammy party.
Well, it sounds to me like you just weren't listening, I'm afraid, Peter. I've said we'll support 5 or 6 families. I mean, you weren't, because you've said we've not answered the question. 5 or 6 families.
You were saying that you would support the Chief Minister. You must have discussed all this before, and you must have your own figures.
Yes, and we said that we'd support the Chief Minister. We sat round a table and we said, this is what we do. But here's the thing about party politics, is we sit down, we discuss things, we come up with what our position is on things. We are still human beings and have our own points of view. There'll be some people in the party who ideally wouldn't like to take in any. There are some that would happily take 6. There are some that would happily take 500. The party position is that we'll support what the Chief Minister does, so long as it's equitable. I think that's very clear-cut, to be perfectly honest.
Up to a maximum of what?
That's a good question. Up to a maximum, I think if we're looking at 20 families, that would really be taking the mickey, I think, to be honest. 5 or 6 is not too much. In fact, it's only about 2 weeks of Jersey regular immigration. So I think what he's proposing is reasonably sensible, I think.
OK, we've got to move on, Peter. I appreciate your question there, and I'm sure we'll find out a bit more about this during the next 20 minutes or so. It's the Politics Hour. Today's guest is Deputy Sam Mézec from Reform Jersey. We're talking mainly about population today. We had our first caller just before all of that breaking news with Cameron there. I've got another comment now, which has been left by Paul on Facebook, Deputy Mézec. Let me just read this to you and get your reaction. He says, this is Paul, we have an ageing population, and like Guernsey, we need people in to work and pay taxes. So Paul is saying that's a double-edged sword, but that's the way it is. And as for Sam Mézec's presence in the States, I've never witnessed anybody so deluded. Reform Jersey are completely outgunning there, and if they think they speak for so many, then I expect Sam himself to stand on an island-wide mandate next time around. Obviously not a fan of yours.
No, I know who it is, actually. Paul Holmes is what he's described his name as. Paul Holmes is not a real person. That's actually somebody else using a fake name on Facebook.
How do you know that?
Because I pay attention to these things. There's a Facebook page which has been set up by one very, very sad individual who has about 5 different accounts, and he comes on the BBC and posts this stuff. I've spoken to your editor about this previously. I'm not going to tell you his name because I won't embarrass you on air, and you'd probably want to stop me from doing so anyway. I know who this is, and it's a very, very, very sad individual, unfortunately, who's got nothing better to do. But I'll answer the point anyway, because it would be illegitimate if it came from someone prepared to use their real name. Yeah.
Let's look at that. Would you consider standing on an island-wide mandate in the next general election?
Almost certainly not. I've always stood on election platforms which have said that I would like to see senators abolished. It would be like, asking me, would I stand for constable? Well, no, I wouldn't, because I'd want constables out of the States as well. It would be hypocritical of me to stand for anything other than deputy in a constituency. That's what I believe is best for island politics, so it would be hypocritical for me to do that. And the one thing I can't stand in politics is hypocrites.
OK, just to take the other point, whether this is genuine or not, we are duty-bound to get you to answer it. So, yeah, like Guernsey, there is an ageing population. We know the figures. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but we are living for longer. Our population is getting older. That's not exclusively a Jersey problem. It's not exclusively a Guernsey problem, or indeed a UK problem. It's a fact. We are living longer. So we do need people to come in, don't we, to replace those workers and to pay the taxes to pay for the reforms that you and your party want to make.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting in that Guernsey, they also have a problem with population, but ironically it's actually the opposite of what ours is. People are leaving Guernsey more than they're coming into the island, whereas it's the opposite in Jersey. yes, we need to make sure that our working age population is sufficiently big enough to be able to contribute economically and pay enough taxes to provide services that will look out for pensioners and young people who are going through education. So, and that is difficult. Let's not pretend this is easy. It is difficult, and there are no silver bullets to this issue. Part of the problem we have, of course, is that there are a significant number of people in Jersey of working age who aren't working. And the reason they're not working is because the jobs aren't being created and the people who are already in those jobs aren't being trained well enough to be able to climb up the ladder, leave vacancies at the bottom for then some of these unemployed people to go into. So to say we're going to take in 600 people a year when we've got about 1,400 people unemployed seems to me to be the wrong approach. The first thing should obviously be to try and get people who are in the island already, who are out of work, into work, and people who are here already, who are on the ladder, should get up the next step on the ladder so they can work their way up as well.
OK, so you, amongst, well, including everybody else, all States members are going to be invited to the briefing from the Chief Minister. Have you checked your email while we've been on? Have you been invited?
I don't have access to it.
OK, then, but as of 12 o'clock when you came into the studio, you've not been invited, so you've no idea when this meeting is going to be. Will you be going?
Oh, yeah, I go to most of these things, which sometimes I wonder if I should be going to them because they do often feel like a complete waste of time. I suspect this probably won't be that different. I suspect that most members of the public recognise that when the States of Jersey has a consultation, it is only to legitimise what they wanted to do in the first place anyway. So I don't have much faith in it. I will go, though, because it's my job. It's my duty to go to these things and do my best to contribute, and I take that duty very seriously.
Does Reform Jersey have in their policy a number in mind that the population should be capped at?
We don't, no. We've not discussed an actual population cap because at the end of the day, the future is completely uncertain. We don't know what our circumstances will be, and there may be a future which requires us to raise population without affecting people's standard of living. It may be possible in the long-term future, but it's just a situation you can't really foresee. And I sort of don't like arbitrary caps because I think they're a bit... they don't let things take their natural course and find their natural equilibrium. And I think an equilibrium, I think, is a good thing to be working towards. So caps I don't necessarily agree with on a philosophical level, but I think we should affect policies which are going to have an impact anyway.
Deputy Sam Mézec is with me from Reform Jersey. We're talking about population. We've got less than 10 minutes to go, 9 minutes now. So if you do want to talk, if you do want to make a point, get on the phone now, 720255. We do have another caller, so Deputy Mézec, if you want to put the headphones on. Barbara's going to join us on the phone now, and I can assure you Barbara is a real person.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, Barbara.
Hi, who am I talking to, Sam?
This is Tony here,
both
and
of
here's,
us.
and here's Deputy Mezec.
Right, well, I was listening to your description of the island, Sam.
Yep.
It is a beautiful place, without a doubt. But there's a big building programme going on. In fact, building is the cash cow of the island now, I would say. So, when and if ever is it going to stop?
That's a good question.
Roads are going to be... Oh, I just can't... Well, you know all everything. And there's one particular firm, I can't name over the phone, but everybody knows.
Yep.
Begins with that... Always gets to the facts before anybody else does. You know, what the hell's going on here?
Reform Jersey, you'll be delighted to know, opposed the development of the finance district on the Esplanade. We think that's going to be looked back on as a mistake which has made our island worse. At the moment they're talking about building the hospital on People's Park, taking away even more green space from...
Well, I'm going to be first in the line of a march. Who's going to join me?
I'll be there alongside with you. I think that'd be a terrible idea, so I'm with you on that as well. I think... It's quite annoying because I think the States of Jersey has a history of approving bad developments and opposing good developments, because every now and then something gets proposed which might be beneficial, but then they end up saying you can't do that, and then they let something like Portlet go ahead, those horrible flats which have ruined the space there.
Disgraceful. But what I liked when I was reading the EP a couple of weeks ago, someone suggested using the Parade Gardens, which I thought was a good idea.
I don't think that's on the list of ones that are being considered, which I find quite strange.
But I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, possibly. I think I could be wrong here, but
although where would we put certain people? Where would they go then?
Yeah, well. Hopefully, we should be intervening to look after people and make sure people aren't falling for substance abuse and are being housed properly. Yeah.
So I mean, they can't take the People's Park. I mean, isn't there a covenant with the People's Park?
If People's Park is to be used, the parishioners of St Helier would have to vote to support it. There would have to be a vote.
They never would do that.
I think you're right. I've got faith in the people of St Helier, and I think we'd oppose that. I mean, I live in St Helier, so I'd be voting against it as well. So
People's Park is so wonderful.
Yeah,
where would you put the hospital, Barbara, if it was your decision?
My decision would be at St Saviour's Hospital, because I know St Saviour's will be eventually built for luxury flats or something like that. I would definitely put St Saviour's Hospital, because I think you've got a huge site there. You can run the buses to and fro there.
OK, then. Well, thanks for your input there, Barbara. We'll see if that suggestion gathers favour. We've only got about 5 minutes left. But
OK, bye.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Where would Reform Jersey support the hospital going then?
I don't think we have a concrete party policy on this. People often criticise political parties, saying that you just, you lose your personality because you just sign up to what the party says. That's not actually true. We sign up to a common set of values before we sign up to anything else. But sometimes those values manifest itself in different ways. My personal view is that I don't think it should be out of town. I know lots of people will disagree with that, but I think it's important for it to be in town, not on People's Park, so it would have to be on the waterfront or on the current site redeveloped. But I think some of my colleagues are actually more open to the idea of it being at Overdale, so that's a little bit out of town, still in St Helier, but a little bit out of the way. There's a debate to be had, but we don't know what the proposals are at the moment because they're being held in secret. And the one final point I'll make, if you'll let me, is Andrew Green promised in his election manifesto that he would deal with this issue within 100 days of being elected. It's now over 365 days, and we've heard nothing yet.
Andrew in St Helier, I don't think it's Andrew Green, called regarding Digital Jersey. Is Deputy Mezec going to push Philip Ozev for online voting? How do you feel about that?
I'd always sort of been a bit hesitant with online voting, but we had a party debate on this subject to decide what our policy on it was going to be, and we decided we would support online voting. I think that is the future. It is the way things are going to go, and if it encourages more people to vote, then that must be a good thing.
Yeah, because I remember talking to you probably just after the election last year, and you were saying then you were disappointed in turnout.
It's atrocious. Election turnouts are terrible in Jersey, and that's why we end up with bad governments. Those 70% of people who don't vote, if you're listening, I'm begging you, please vote next time round, because we can undo lots of the damage being done by this government if ordinary people come out and vote and have their say.
OK, well, we've certainly been having our say over the last hour or so. I'm just getting a few more questions in here. Dorothy from St Helier saying, and she's probably right here, it's never pointed out that many pensioners are still paying tax, which is a valid point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the effect of the budget is eventually going to be erasing the tax allowance, the special tax allowance for pensioners. If you're over 65, you get a slightly larger tax allowance than you do if you're below 65, and the government intends to abolish that, which goes against Senator Alan McLean's manifesto pledge, which was that he wanted pensioners to be treated like royalty. Well, I don't think it's treating them like royalty if you're taking away their tax allowances.
Did he have to throw away his mandate or his manifesto? That's the word I'm looking for. When he became, or when he was reinstalled into the Council of Ministers, do you think?
Absolutely, they all have to. Their manifestos are not worth the paper they're written on.
Let me bring you a couple of other points in the closing minute or so that we've got now. Let's have a look. Really, this is bringing it right around full circle. But last November, you'll remember, a survey showed controlling Jersey's population should be the government's top priority. And I think that's what you've been saying as well. About 1,000 people replied to this. It was the annual social survey, of course. What were your thoughts on this?
The annual social survey, I can't remember.
On the survey coming up with the fact that the population should be the government's top priority to deal with.
I agree with it. If you go onto vote.je and check my election speech from the election, I devoted the whole thing talking about population because I said it was the number one thing we should be discussing. And I think the government has kicked it down has kicked it into the long grass too often, and it needs to get back on the top of the agenda. I fully agree.
One last point: what solutions can you come up with to help our ageing and growing population? We've talked about that extensively. The fact that that's happening right now. Do your party have firm plans to deal with this?
I think largely it was dealt with our amendments to the MTFP last week, which unfortunately were all rejected, but it was based on the premise that if we had a fairer taxation system, we'd be able to raise funds which are better suited to providing through our public services what the population need. So that will mean we can provide better healthcare services for people as they get older and need to see the doctor a bit more often and that sort of thing. The tax system is fundamental to all of that. Alongside population, you need to know how many people you're going to have and how much money you're going to have. Those are the two things you need to know.
Deputy Sam Mézec, thank you for joining me in the Politics Hour today on BBC Radio Jersey.